Alrighty, Fish Unfiltered episode 76. I'm here with Eli Sussman, founder of Fish on First, and Hector Rodriguez, who is our draft analyst, draft expert, as we call him in our chat. But we are very excited to have Frankie Piliere, the Marlins director of amateur scouting. Frankie, how are we doing? Very excited to have you on.
We're in the home stretch. It's getting fun. Thanks, you guys, for having me.
So you're in year two of this job, Frankie. You know, you already underwent your first year. You had your first draft class. Just what's it been like in this new role for you with the organization? You know, now a year in.
It's been a lot of fun. Peter's been great. The whole new group has been fantastic. I think we're headed in the right direction. It's just been a blast. It's, anyone who gets into scouting, I think, wants to eventually run a draft and see how it would shake out, try some new things. And it's kind of what we've gotten to do here. Like, we've been creative, and we know the position we're in. We know we're the Marlins. We have to make some, pun intended already, splashes, but we've got to try some things, and we've created an environment to do that. Like, it's been really fun so far.
So the scouting world is a pretty small world, and not a lot of people go into it thinking that they want to do it. But what made you want to become, a scout?
I think I've said this to a few people. It really is the puzzle of it. The fact that people are wrong most of the time when they do it made it very attractive to me. It'll drive you a little bit crazy at times, but the fact that you could walk in the door is something I say to my staff all the time, that you're mostly 80+% wrong most of the time. It means that the whole world is not that great at doing this, and that makes it a really, really interesting challenge. I remember thinking about that from a fairly young age. I think I've told the story of I was a Yankee fan growing up, and when the Yankees started to lose and the dynasty ended, you started to see these teams drafting really well and developing from within and making differences in the draft and making differences in player evaluation. I think that was probably the early inklings of it for me.
Frankie, let's take a quick look back at your first full draft class as the Marlins guy from less than a year ago. As you alluded to, some of these guys, you're going to be wrong eventually on some of them, but it's a little premature to write anybody off. I just want to get your thoughts on how these players have progressed on the pro side compared to what you may have thought when you selected them. Anybody that you've been pleasantly surprised by, or that has shown some sort of new skill, or just a louder tools perhaps than you may have thought on draft day last year?
Yeah, there's a number of them. I think there's some fun ones as we go down the list. I think Fenwick Trimble is probably the obvious one that most people are talking about. Fenwick, hopefully to get him back on the field and ready to roll soon, but he's moved really fast. And the reason you take a player like Fenwick Trimble is not because if you thought he was going to move this fast, you'd probably take him even quicker in the draft. You put yourself in a position to exceed expectations is essentially what you're doing with that type of player. A low walk, athletic player with a good frame, a lot of things that we liked. And as soon as he got into pro ball and we started working with him, swing decisions improve quite dramatically, quite a bit. And all of a sudden you have a really interesting player. He's a little bit quicker than he was when we got him. The swing decisions are better, and still the same contact ability, still the same like power and upside. So he really stands out. You go further, like way down the board, Nate Payne has been a lot of fun. And that was like an upside high school guy that our scouts were really passionate about. And again, that was one we kind of stayed on, and it was not somebody that as a high school player had overwhelming stuff, but his stuff's really good now. It's ticked up. And if you take guys with good deliveries that throw strikes, that you believe in sort of the baseline for development, you're in a pretty good spot. I think we're pretty excited about that one too.
So in that draft, your first two picks, you went in the high school route with PJ Orlando and Carter Johnson. Just your early returns on what have you seen from those two guys?
Yeah, it's been like, obviously they've had some struggles for different reasons. Carter, we kind of figured it would be a longer road with the bat. It's a defense first player with a younger body, and he's going through the bumps and bruises right now. I think this is obviously we want him to do really, really well out of the gate, but I don't think you can go into players like this and be shocked or taken off track when it's not an instant success. We really believe in Carter. Like, he's another player who's gotten faster and stronger since he got here. He's just going through the bumps and bruises of facing Jupiter level pitching every night, which is something I say to all these draft guys when I meet them now is you're going to get there and you're going to be facing 95 with a really good slider pretty much every night. You're going to have to go through failure. And it's the reason we took PJ Morlando and Carter Johnson, just on top of the fact that we knew they were talented, is they could handle it. Like PJ's gone through the injury stuff, and every time I see him, it's the same look on his face and the same attitude towards life. And that's what gives me confidence to take upside type plays, is when you can believe in the person that they can get through it, because it's going to be hard. Now, it's been exceedingly hard for both of them in different ways, but that's what gives you faith to kind of keep going back to that well and being able to do it. You have to actually believe in the person, because life is tough in the Florida State League.
Are there any concerns with Morlando's health, considering that, he was your first round pick and he's had a bunch of different injuries that have kept him off the field? He's only played 20 career games. Are there any concerns with his medicals, moving forward, or is it just some bad luck that he's been getting?
I genuinely believe it's been a run of bad luck, and it's a tough sequence of events, but PJ's body's in a great spot. It's when you draft 18, 19-year-old players, there's just naturally some, not just learning curve to being, facing professional pitching, but, staying healthy. I think over time he's going to figure this out, and he's just kind of been through a patch of bad luck.
With your competitive round pick, Aiden May, unfortunately yet to make his debut, he underwent right elbow arthroscopic surgery. Just what's the latest on him? When can we expect him to make his Marlins debut, or his pro debut, better said?
I'd have to check the timeline on that. I don't know off the top of my head, but I know I saw him at the complex. I know he's feeling good. My hope and understanding is it's not that long, but I don't want to speak out of turn because I don't remember the timeline off the top of my head. But Aiden seems to be right on track for where we hoped he would be.
Well, Frankie, ultimately, most of these fans are looking back at the draft class again. They just care about which of these guys are going to make it to the big leagues and have an impact once they get there. So as somebody, you're not involved in this process, so I was hoping to get somewhat of a candid answer as best as you can guesstimate it. Which of these guys do you think has an opportunity to make it up to the majors first, regardless of what role that it is in? People are kind of anxious to see the returns of this at the big league level. And at this moment, a couple of these guys have tasted Double-A, nobody beyond that yet. So whether it's 2026 or 2027, who do you think could be on the fastest track of these guys to actually get up to the highest level?
That's a great question. I mean, I think we've seen now with minor league baseball, like that track and trajectory can change really fast. But I think we're just being logical. Like we look at the way that Fenwick has moved through the minor leagues so far. I think I wouldn't be surprised if it were him, but obviously this is just a very fun Frankie opinion answer, but that's, looking at what he's done so far, that wouldn't surprise me. But I also think we've seen quick 1 year trajectory and turnaround. It could be a number of these guys on here. We drafted a lot of college players last year. It could be honestly any number of them with a turn of a dial here and there. Nick Brink has the ability to move fast. I think Aiden May has a chance once he's back on the field to move really, really fast. I think Gage Miller, if he kicks it into gear a little bit more, they all kind of have that ability. But logically, I think given what he's done, Fenwick Trimble moving up quickly wouldn't surprise me, just because we believe in Fenwick and the adjustments he's made so far.
So listening to you before and after the 2024 draft process, you had mentioned that you thought that the strength of last year's draft class was college bats, and looking at the board last year, you spent about half of your picks on those college hitters. What do you think is the demographic for this upcoming draft class?
It's a really interesting group. I do think, a lot of people have naturally complained about the top of the draft. It's a very common thing that people do. And what I will say about the top of the draft this year is I tend to believe that there's always going to be some good big leaguers up there. You have some bad drafts here and there, but I bet more good big leaguers come out of the top of the draft than people think, just because it's usually how it works. I just think it's less clear at the top this year. I think there are players that haven't quite separated themselves. Last year it might have been a little bit obvious. I do think it's a very deep high school position group. I also still think it goes against popular belief. I think it's a good college group too. I just think it's not the obvious top 2 or 3 that clearly separate themselves. I think there's plenty of depth down the board, but I think if you ask me to sort of make a bet on the future, I think we could look back at some of the high school position players. I think there's just a lot of them this year that they're tough to separate out, that I think teams 1 through 50, I think are going to get a lot of talented high school bats in there too. But I tend to downplay overall the weakness at the top. I think there's a lot of good players. It just might require a little more work.
So I guess looking at this current class of players that you're about to select, what makes this one different from 2024 overall? Just, looking at the landscape of all the players that were in 2024's draft pool from this one as well.
What makes it different? Probably the fact that I do think we picked 16th last year, and as we sat there at 16, I think we had a very clear idea, despite being midway through the first round, who we thought would definitely be gone, who we thought it would be a cluster of players who could be available. It's more difficult than that this year. I think there's a lot less clarity in the first 6 picks ahead of us. And again, I'll always pause people and say that doesn't mean they're not good. I just think it's a lot less clear and it's harder to separate them out. It's going to be very eye of the beholder, all of those cliches, but I think it does happen to be true this year. That's what feels different to me. It's like we don't have a super clear idea of these players are definitely off the board. And I think everyone would probably have a little different thought on that.
So the draft is now condensed from 3 days to just 2, which obviously that's a big change. So do you like it that way? How does that affect the way you guys are going to make picks, or like does that affect it in any way now going from 3 days to 2?
For me, no. I might be in the minority. I love it. I love the speed of it on day 2. I love the fact that you have to be very, very prepared for the speed of it and have deep sets of information on players way down the board. I believe that gives us an advantage. I think the teams that are really, really well prepared and embrace the end of the draft will be in a really good position to take good players. And I think everyone else will too. I think everyone's going to have to speed back up, but I think it's great. I love the rapid fire nature of it.
Fish on First has partnered with About the Fans to launch a merchandise collection. Rep the FOF logo in more Marlins-inspired apparel. Find it all at aboutthefans.com. Enter coupon code FOF10 at checkout to get 10% off your order. FOF10 for a 10% discount.
College baseball has changed a lot in the past couple of years with the transfer portal era. And you've seen a lot of D1 guys that usually hit the transfer portal. They would end up in the JUCO ranks, but now they're just ending up at other D1 programs. How important is it to still evaluate JUCO prospects, especially when you see a guy like Jacob Mizorowski, who's been outstanding since he's arrived? He was a second-round pick out of a JUCO. Just, how important is it to still evaluate those type of players? And how do you try to evaluate a JUCO prospect compared to a 4-year university guy and a high school prospect?
Yeah, I don't think the evaluation itself doesn't change that much, except your probably projection and changes the player might make are a little bit more front of mind. But to answer your first question, it's really important, probably more important than ever to draft what I would call like around the edges, because we have so much information on college players that's only going to grow. We're going to get more and more data and more video. They're so easily accessible into how much you can watch them. Now the JUCO players and even the high school players to some extent, the small school players, you might spend a lot of time fishing there, not a lot of time catching. We do a lot of exploratory stuff to make sure that we cover those players. Now sometimes it's going to feel like you're wasting a resource, but when it pays off, to your point, you mentioned Mizorowski, players like that, it's a lot of effort into, looking for one or two, a couple big payoffs. When you get it right, when you're there to get that evaluation of the player, it's really important. So that's something we don't specify it specifically to JUCO, but we just spend it on where can we go scout the players that are a little bit harder to scout, a little bit harder to get the information. That's where you get the huge dividends, because that's where the information that different teams have can be different. I think most teams are going to have kind of the same information on an SEC player, but they could have really uneven information on that D2 or JUCO or lesser high school player.
Frankie, you touched on it quickly there about getting that information. You on an individual level, can you give us an idea of what players or what situations cause you to travel to, whether it's to get a live look at a certain player, or what kind of trips you make during the spring and early summer that in this era where you can get so much information on these players from your office without having to go there, what situations call for you to actually go someplace in order to get something firsthand for yourself that you think is important? How do you prioritize those players or those situations that are worth the trip from your end?
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret because it's when I pop up in a small town somewhere, I'm not, I don't tend to blend right in. So I spend a lot of time in those types of places. I will go spend a lot of time on a high school player and sit there and get depth of information. And as opposed to just sort of driving by something, I think the thing that is often missing, if you're looking for ways to get edges in scouting, how do you get them? Everybody's got the showcase information. Everybody's got the data from college. You have to have depth and time spent on these guys and hope to get other pieces of information that others don't have. And that doesn't mean me sitting there and saying my opinion is the best. It's really trying to get stuff that is both subjective and that is my opinion and objective. Like try to get more defensive reps, try to get more speed reps, try to understand the player maybe a little bit more as a whole than what the league or the industry would say. Because there's a lot of stuff that is, rounded off when players are written about or talked about by other teams. You'd be shocked when I talk to another scouting director, they talk to me how differently we see the players. We see the consensus at the end and when we sort of aggregate everybody's opinions together, but there are a lot of diverging opinions out there. And sometimes like if it's a good diverging opinion, that's how you beat somebody.
So we're less than a month away from the draft, and a lot of the media outlets are already starting to do mock drafts. The trend right now seems to be that the Marlins are trending towards a prep bat. Without going into any details or any specifics, just what do you normally look for when you're evaluating a prep position player?
I mean, the thing I'll say off the top is we'll always take best player available, always. But when you're looking at a prep position player, I think it comes back down to what we talked about is you have less information by a pretty wide margin than a college player who's been there for 3 years, especially if it's a big school with a lot of data. You just have a lot less. So one, you spend more time on it. Even if you don't end up drafting that player, it's something we talk about frequently. We might spend a lot of time on this area because it requires it, but we might take a college player if they're the best player available. Like that's always what we'll do. But the prep player requires a lot, and we're trying to be as objective as possible. And it's hard because you don't get a lot of objective information on a 17, 18, 19-year-old player, but we try to get it as best we can. But it really requires a lot of reps. Imagine if you just saw a snippet of any big league superstar. You saw a snippet of a major league player. We take it for granted because we can pull up their page any day of the week and know kind of the DNA of exactly who they are. You can get fooled very, very easily if you don't spend enough time, don't gather enough scouting samples on a high school player. So that's kind of the biggest thing is let's not let our eyes fool us. Let's spend a lot of times, get a lot of information on these players and know them really well. And obviously that's the tact with everybody, but with college players, you just can get it in a lot of different avenues.
I guess how tough is it to convince those guys to join your organization? I mean, we saw with, Grant Shepardson last year, It took a little bit more to go oversaw it, because those guys want to go to college and want to get their education or want to play college ball, whatever it may be. How do you guys as an organization or your scouts just convince them, hey, look, you could come play pro ball for the Marlins? Like, what's the message to those guys who may have a good college offer, especially now in the world of NIL where, money talks?
More than anything, they have to be ready. Like we try to convince them, of course, but we never want to get to the point where we feel like we are talking someone out of the right thing for their life. Because if it's not the right thing for their life, like we talked about with even playing in Jupiter, it's very hard. Like it is, even if somebody is talented, it can be hard to get over those initial bumps in the road. So we spend a lot of time thinking about that, whether it's the right thing for a player. And sometimes it is just the right thing for them to go to college and develop there. And then we end up drafting them 3 years later. A lot of them, we spend a lot of time thinking, oh, imagine if we drafted them 3 years ago, they might not have been ready. They might have needed the college experience. So we spend a lot of time trying to figure out the right ones who are ready, that feel ready, that, and they need to feel good about it as well as we do. And like everybody, there's a financial component, obviously. Like some people put out a lot bigger number and want a lot more money to sign. And some people are more reasonable, and that can be fairly telling about what they want to do. But it has to be the right thing. I think both sides really have to turn their key, or you just see situations where players aren't ready. They have the talent, but they're not ready emotionally or mentally, or just they need a little bit more seasoning. But so we try to evaluate that as best we can.
So you had touched on it a little bit with all the data and technology that's been integrated into the college baseball world. How much has pitching and hitting labs into D1 programs helped you evaluate prospects at top programs like the LSUs of the world and the Floridas and Florida States?
I think the actual labs and the things they're doing on campus, it helps because the players are probably more ready to make that transition. I think the stuff we are going to use, and when I say we, it's really probably all teams at this point, is we get the TrackMan data. Kinetrax is going in college ballparks slowly but surely. I think it's more of the public facing stuff than the stuff they're doing internally. But I think we do try to learn a lot about what is happening at these college programs. What are they doing? What are the kids getting exposed to? Because that's going to tell us a lot about how they react to advancements that are in pro ball and stuff that they're going to have to work with day to day. But yeah, the actual data that they might be collecting that's proprietary at these programs, sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. If we get it in anecdotal form, but we're really looking at the stuff that is more of the TrackMan and Kinetrax oriented.
I'm curious, as someone here who covers college ball in South Florida, and Hector covering the Gators, just do you guys hone in a little bit more on South Florida talent, knowing the saying is that high school talent in Florida is probably some of the best? Obviously, it's really good everywhere, but for some reason, everyone says South Florida is the best. Obviously, college ball in Florida is really at a high level right now with some great teams. Do you guys hone in on that a little bit more, knowing the market you guys are in here in Miami, and the quality of teams that there are currently, high school and college?
I wouldn't say we hone in on it more. I would say that we have some natural advantages of just like we have a lot of people and we're naturally there a lot more. So I would bet that we have just an advantage that we aren't even really necessarily trying to get. But we just look at the talent from everywhere, to be honest. Like I think there's probably some organic advantage, but not something we are tactically trying to do more than other teams.
Just a couple more questions for you, Frankie. Peter Bendix, obviously president of baseball operations. He's heavily involved in every aspect of what the organization does. What do you do when you disagree with Peter on something? I'm sure he's keeping tabs on throughout the year on this draft cycle, but especially when it's time to make selections. How much influence does he have in some of these player selections compared to how much control do you feel that you have in actually making the selections, considering that you have to collaborate with Peter, and there's just so many ways to split hairs between these players?
One of my favorite topics, because Peter is about as trusting in me as I could ever really ask for, but he is also a great stress tester. And the answer to your question is like, we end up having a fantastic discussion. It's like we bounce ideas back and forth, but ultimately he is there to sort of try to help me get to an answer, but he is very, very trusting. And I think that's what makes what big part of what makes him such a great leader for us is that he does trust the people that he has hired to do the job. And he is an outstanding player evaluator himself, probably even better than he gives himself credit for. So I have a lot of trust in when I bounce an idea off him that he'll give me good feedback, but he's really a great partner in that draft room and helping making sure that we end up on good players, and obviously like very vested interest in it. But his level of trust and level of feedback is, I can't speak more highly about it.
This topic comes up constantly, the differences between the major league draft and other major sports leagues, especially in the US, in terms of the flexibility or lack of flexibility to trade those picks. You see it all the time. NBA draft just happened and the trades galore. But in baseball, you're only limited to a very narrow band of picks that can even be traded, even if you were interested in doing so. Is that something that you advocate for moving forward? Do you want the flexibility, whether it is to trade up or trade down in the future, given how a process is playing out and the players that are available? Or do you think that would just add more trouble than it's worth to have all those different options in order to rearrange things as the draft is going on?
Boy, I don't know, because I obviously have thought about it quite a bit. Like, I think there are obvious pitfalls, which I think are, the different market sizes, everything. There are obvious real pitfalls. I could go either way, honestly. I do think I can see the merit and I can see the significant downside too. I mean, I'm more than happy the way it is now, but I won't deny that it's interesting. It is definitely it's definitely something that pops into, I think, every scouting director's head, especially in a year where you're going, it's not that clear who the top guys are. I wonder, what's available here. Obviously you introduced the lottery. There are a lot of different factors to consider, but yeah, I don't know. It would be a really interesting discussion. I'm not sure where I land.
What are your thoughts on the draft lottery?
Well, obviously it is wonderful. No, it's quite literally the ball bounces certain ways sometimes. And, I said it at the time, I'll say it again. We're going to get a very good player. I trust that our processes will get us to a good place. And, obviously you want to pick, if we're winning every year, you don't want to pick as high as possible, but when we're in our position, a high pick obviously increases your odds of a better player. But I know we're going to get to a good spot.
Just how far in advance do you start to evaluate or at least target prospects in future drafts like 26 and 27?
I'd say that process is very much started at an area scout level now. I mean, does it really ramp up after the draft? Yes, but we've got follows and reports in our system for 26 and 27s, and that to me is still why the area scout ground level scouting is always going to be so important. Somebody has to go find these guys and someone has to identify them and start the book and then actually know them really well. And that is a years long process. It starts before I really know them that well. And that's why the system works so well. And it's why it's one of the few things in scouting that hasn't changed dramatically is you do need somebody to go out and identify, even though there's showcases, even though there's college, like somebody has to do it at the beginning. And that's what makes the scout so valuable. But yeah, we've got quite a few reports on those years already.
That's right. Where we will wrap it up. Frankie, we really appreciate your time. Less than a month away from the draft. Marlins hold the 7th pick this year, and we'll wrap it up there. From Hector, from Eli, myself, Frankie. We'll see you guys all in 2 weeks. Peace out and go fish.